Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descendant life forms are so amazingly primitive that two of them still think doing a podcast called Digital Watches are a pretty neat idea is a pretty neat idea. These podcasters have, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Actually, this is the solution.
Hey, Brian, what's this?
This?
Yeah, this.
Well, this is our discussion of Douglas Adams's Last Chance to See, Jeff.
What's that?
Well, it's a fantastic book, as it turns out, from my perspective.
Is it in space?
Yes, it's in a gentle orbit of the Earth.
Okay, it's very gentle.
He does leave the Earth a number of times, and we are given very vivid descriptions of his feelings about that.
Yeah.
But tell me, you know what the book is about. Why don't you give us an overview?
Okay, so Douglas Adams and a zoologist named Mark Carwadine took trips in 1985, 1988, and 1989 to see, photograph, and write about some of the world's most endangered species. He let us know that they went to Madagascar, Indonesia, New Zealand, Zaire, China, and Mauritius. So all the other trips, other than the one in Madagascar, they recorded for BBC Radio, and I've never been able to find them, and that has really bothered me.
I know. I mean, they do talk a lot about the efforts that are made for the radio show.
Right.
In fact, they mention additional passengers on the plane and on the different modes of transport that are responsible for audio recording a number of times. So I would have assumed that the BBC radio show would be out there somewhere and available.
Yeah, you would imagine, but the original radio series I have not been able to locate anywhere.
Well, Jeff, maybe one of our devoted fans can help us find this mysterious piece of art.
Maybe, but our devoted fans are about as endangered as the animals in this book.
Yes, I know. But we love each and every one of them.
Absolutely. Before we get into the specifics of the book, I guess I want to know what your expectation of the book was going to be versus what it turned out to be.
Well, that's a good question, and certainly I have a perspective on this. When it comes to some of these environmental books, they can be kind of heavy-handed and one-sided in their projection of what they believe to be the proper way of doing things.
Yes.
And I was very impressed, and it's due to the character of Douglas Adams himself, that he's very open-minded and gives us a very, I would consider it a broader perspective as to how these endangered animals are being treated and how environmentalism can protect these animals, and some of the, range that we have to go to allow these things to occur and protect what needs to be protected.
Yes. I feared that it was going to read like a textbook.
Yeah, so did I. That's a good example of what I was thinking.
However, it turned out to be a travelogue. Like, we're trying to get to this place, and here are all the trials and tribulations, and we finally got there, and then we saw an animal. And now we're going to this place.
Yeah, yep.
I wish they spent a little bit more about some of the animals. Sometimes I think they just brushed past that bit a little bit too fast.
I agree. After listening to the book, and I was thoroughly enjoying all of it, I thought to myself, how are we going to relate this story to people? Because as is Douglas's propensity, most of what he does is an environmental description of what's going on.
Absolutely.
His turn of phrase and his thought patterns are all related to what he sees and what's going on around him.
Yes.
So again, I won't say it lacks plot, because obviously the plot is the story of going out to see these animals, but it's much more about the environment in which he finds himself. And to my delight, it's done in a fantastic way.
Absolutely. There's no way that we could do his writing justice in trying to tell you how he experienced everything, because he does it in his way, and it's brilliant. And we'll tell you everything that happened, but our description of everything that happened in no way, shape, or form will spoil your enjoyment of reading this book.
Oh, absolutely not. And I'm going to add another caveat here. One of the things that I found delightful is, and this is unusual for me, I think, this book really feels to me like a book that can be listened to, and specifically listened to by the author here, because the cadence and tempo of the language and the dialogue that Adams has and uses when he's using his own voice as he's writing is really highlighted in this audiobook. And I would recommend the audiobook even over reading, which is a strange recommendation from my perspective.
Yeah. Well, the copy we have is read by Douglas Adams. I don't know if another one out there exists that isn't read by Douglas Adams, but when it's read by the author, you're getting exactly what was meant. Mm-hmm. There's no interpretation of a reader.
Exactly. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend the book, and I recommend this audiobook specifically.
Well, we just went through the holidays, and Denise and I had to make a trip to Michigan to spend the holidays with her family. Mm-hmm. And as I'm listening to the book, I'm thinking it's tremendous and actually something that she would enjoy. So I suggested that be our selection. And she just said, "You're not going to make me listen to a Douglas Adams book, are you?"
No, honey, I wouldn't do that.
No. So we listened to Michael Crichton's Dragon Teeth, which is something about the Old West. And anyway, after we finished it, I said, I bet you wish we listened to a Douglas Adams book.
Well, I'm a Crichton fan, so I'm surprised. Weren't you riveted by the story?
No. It violated my, if you want me to believe in your fantasy, you have to get what's real correct.
Ah, okay. Well, we're not here to review that book, unfortunately, but...
You're right. No, we are not. Mm-hmm. So when we start out with the first chapter, it's titled Twig Technology. And twig technology is, I guess, our human technology.
Correct.
And we've evolved from monkeys, and he loves to point that out over and over and over.
Yep.
And monkeys use twigs, and their use of twigs has advanced to microprocessors and everything else that we know today. The first trip that they took to Madagascar was to find the nearly extinct nocturnal animal, the aye-aye, for the Observer Color magazine. So here are a few things that caught my attention. Some I kind of knew, others I didn't. Virtually everything on the island country of Madagascar exists nowhere else in the world. Mm-hmm. It's on Madagascar, nowhere else.
Right.
I just find that amazing.
It is amazing.
The aye-aye is a lemur. I have heard of lemurs.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that lemurs only exist on Madagascar. Because they were one of the branches of primates, and on the mainland of the world, in Africa, the monkeys beat out the lemurs in the race for survival, but the monkeys didn't make it to Madagascar.
Right.
So they had not had the monkeys to compete with, and now there's 40 different species of lemurs on Madagascar.
Oh, yes. Does that include the 2 that they mention all the way at the end of the book?
So at the time of writing this book, this number of species of lemur was only 21.
Oh, okay. Got it.
At one time, there were over 40, but the population is going down. And the that they're looking for exists on one small island, Nosy Mangabe.
Isn't it funny? Even without his creating the world tends to revolve around his sense of odd names.
Yes, right. So prior to the trip, they doubted that the even existed because none had been seen in 2 years. But they actually found and saw one on Madagascar.
Yep, they did.
So I did, as I'm reading this, wonder what the heck is an So I looked up, and from the Duke Lemur Center's website, I found a description. So the unusual physical characteristics of this particular lemur include incisors that are continually growing, which is unique among primates. So I guess they would just keep growing and growing and growing, and their eating and biting things would wear them down, and it just keeps... They've got extremely large ears and a middle finger, which is skeletal in appearance, and it sounds like it's longer than you would expect.
Yes. That's the way
it's got this stick-like finger that it uses to poke around and do what it needs to do.
Well, they do... Douglas Adams says it also in the book that one of the unique features of this particular island is there's no woodpeckers. So that the animals that burrow into the wood and create their home there are a highly nutritious food source, and the uses this long finger to reach into these small holes, digging out these little grub-like creatures, insects, and that provides sustenance. So that's why they believe that the finger was developed as it is defined.
So the still exists, but it is still listed as endangered.
Okay.
We are then introduced to the animals they will be searching for.
Oh, okay.
The northern white rhino, the mountain gorilla, the kakapo, the Yangtze River dolphin, the Komodo dragon, and the Rodriguez fruit bat. So we get to the next chapter. Here be chickens. And then there were no chickens.
That's right, there are no chickens. One thing I remember specifically, because it does talk about twig technology, and I do think that it was kind of funny the way he says, when they're discussing where they might go or what they might do, he's asking about the calendar and his availability. So he went back to where his equipment was stored, and he grabbed his Filofax, which he describes as having been mashed together by twigs and held together by something that was previously holding together a cow.
Yes.
Which I thought was very funny.
Yes, it's a great way to describe leather. So 3 years after that trip to Madagascar, this project started. They went to Indonesia to look for the Komodo dragon. The Komodo dragon will kill to eat, but is really just a scavenger, and will only kill if there's nothing to scavenge. I liked how he described something that I 100% knew, which was that the island of Komodo, like Australia, is full of creatures that can kill you.
Absolutely. This was interesting. When they were describing first arriving, he was looking at the pile of equipment, and one thing that they find that they don't understand why, they find a cricket bat among their pile of equipment.
Yes.
And then there's a discussion about how the cricket bat got there and what they're going to do with the cricket bat, et cetera, et cetera. But it made me wonder, was that really a cricket bat there, or was that just added in so that he could tie in all of his other writings, et cetera?
You know, I've had a lot of those thoughts that I'm listening to, because a lot of his trip seemed so unbelievable that all of that could have possibly happened to one group of people on one single trip.
Oh, yes.
That I don't know how much was embellishment. So I'm going to take it as it was the trip from hell every single trip.
Mm-hmm,
but
mm-hmm.
yes, it may have just been a bat. But they don't have regular bats in England.
It
So
would
if
have
they
been
brought
if
something,
it was there was a
bat.
cricket bat, right? Because of course these are
Yes.
colonized by the English, so the cricket is probably a game that was played, but it just seemed a little artificial when I first got there,
Yes. Yep, absolutely. So the beginning of this adventure sounded like every travel nightmare that was all rolled into one. They had plane ticket confusion, and I liked the line, confirmed does not actually mean confirmed as such. It's just what is written on the ticket to make people go away.
Yes, we reached the point of bistromathics, huh?
Right. I also like that they're constantly told that there's no need to get upset when they're trying to get everything straightened out. But nothing was ever handled until they got upset.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever they were being nice and congenial, they'd all go, okay, and then nothing would ever happen. But as soon as they got upset, the problems were solved. I did write down a couple of other things I liked how he put. Like he said, everything we were told about Indonesia was wrong, and usually immediately wrong. Except when we were told that something would happen immediately. That was drawn out over an extended period of time.
Exactly. Oh, yes.
I like that they were made fun of for having so much baggage for where they were going.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to these remote island places, and they've got stacks of boxes and equipment and luggage.
Yep. He's always talking about his camera equipment and all of that.
Yes, yeah. And they were bringing live chickens on the boat to Komodo, and he called it food in its non-perishable form.
Oh, my gosh.
So, on their way to Komodo, they're told how exclusive it is, how difficult it is to get into. You can't just go. You have to have reservations. There's all of these arrangements that need to be made. So he had this expectation of what to see when he got there. And when they get there, they discovered a visitor's village with an administration center, a museum, a cafeteria, and it was full of people who had been there for hours and had come over on the daily ferry when they spent all day trying to charter a private boat.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You had mentioned earlier that they were told about how dangerous this particular island was. And
Yes.
One of the things that they were told is that there were many, many venomous snakes on the island. So as an attempt to understand their peril, they went and visited a venomous snake expert.
Right.
And I don't know if you recall this particular conversation, but they talk with this gentleman who's a venomous snake guy, and there's a lot of back and forth, and it's really rather funny. And one of the things that really struck out with me is when you listen to Douglas Adams and you listen to the cadence of the conversation that he has, when he's actually writing about dialogue and relating back a conversation that takes place, you get a very specific understanding of the character's personality.
Right.
And to me, it's just simply amazing. I mean, when you listen to this part of the conversation, they're going back and forth with this guy, and he's talking about poisonous snakes. But poisonous snakes is not his passion. He's really passionate about hydroponics. And if he had a choice, he'd talk about hydroponics, not poisonous snakes. And he said the best way to avoid poisonous snakes is not go where poisonous snakes are.
Right.
So, and the reason that he's never been bitten by a poisonous snake is he's smart enough to know that he needs to hire other people to handle the poisonous snakes so he doesn't get bitten. And it's kind of a, it's a back and forth. It's very fast in his use of language and pace, like I said, but it gives you the idea of how quick-witted Douglas Adams is, but he's trying to relate this to the character of this poisonous snake expert. And it's really, really rather fascinating to me how he does that. And in fact, in this particular conversation, early in the conversation, the gentleman offers them some cake. And he says that he has some cake and would they like some cake? And later when he's going to get the venom out of the refrigerator, he says, oh, here's the cake I made. It's fairy cake. Would you like a piece? And so again, I'm thinking to myself, how did fairy cake actually turn up in this story?
Right. It's like a cameo of all of his little phrases.
Well, that's kind of what I kept thinking to myself. I mean, obviously, it could have perfectly happened exactly as he described it, but what a juxtaposition.
Yes. They eventually get to go and see the dragons, and they see that it is set up as a tourist attraction. He called it a horror circus show, and he described the slaughter of a goat and the feeding of the dragons in great detail.
Oh, yes.
So, he did not hold anything back when it came to that horror circus show.
No, and I guess I should have expected that, but for some reason I was thinking it was going to be a little more genteel. But I should have been prepared,
Yeah. He talks about the irony of the situation with the Komodo dragon, and it almost applies to every one of his animals that he sees in this book. That irony is that these animals are most in danger from a growing human population. So humans have to save the dragons and all these other animals from humans. And you can't just leave them alone, because if nobody knows about them, nobody's going to care about them, and nobody's going to help provide the funds to save them. So the dragons need public interest to garner the funds to save them.
Mm-hmm.
And public interest is created by public access.
Right.
Hence the horror circus show.
Yes, and he does go into some in-depth conversation to his audience here in the book about, well, why didn't he object to the slaughter of the goat and that kind of thing. And this is where I thought he at least allowed for the range of possibilities here, because like you say, without the entertainment for the average individual, how are they going to garner enough interest? And it's unfortunate, but it seems to be the way to generate the money that they need to protect the animals.
It's the only way.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I found very funny about this particular chapter is that they have a conversation about the people that are on the ship and that are helping them out. And one of the gentlemen is introduced to Adams as Moose. But he later finds out that the gentleman's name is Hieronymus. And then he makes a funny joke about the Hirano being silent.
Right, because there was also an island, or there was a town or a city that he mentioned that had a silent part of it.
Yes.
Yeah, so that moose tied into that, right?
that I thought it was awfully funny and certainly along the lines of what you would expect from Adams is that when he's reflecting about the goat, he's sitting on the beach, apparently, at that moment, and he happens to see some mud skippers come up out of the water, and they're kind of working their way up a tree, and he's wondering why these mud skippers would be, trying to get up a tree. And his other traveling companion says, well, they're experimenting. They're trying to see if living in a tree would be better for them than living on land. And then, of course, in typical Douglas Adams fashion, he imagines himself in the distant future where the evolved creatures that evolved from the mud skippers are now sitting there wondering whether it's ethical to save the humans.
Right.
By exploiting them.
Yeah.
When it comes to the Komodo dragon today, there's approximately 3,500 individuals that exist. And that's based on my most current research I was able to find out. And of those, there's about 400 mature females. So the condition of the Komodo dragon seems to be pretty stable in relationship to the numbers as described by Douglas Adams and his group and the ones that exist today. So in terms of its extinction, it's fairly consistent throughout this period of time. So we're talking about a period of 35 to 40 years where we've seen some stability. And that's probably primarily because of the ability that we were just talking about, where they can promote this animal by environmental tourism.
Yes. The next chapter is titled Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat. And in this chapter, they go to Zaire, which is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. They're looking for the northern white rhinoceros. At this time, there are about 22 in the wild in Zaire, 8 in captivity in Czechoslovakia, and a small number in the San Diego Zoo in California.
Mm-hmm.
I expect there to be some differences between the audio recording and the book that I'm using for reference.
Mm-hmm.
The book I was using for reference is the first American edition.
Right.
I have to believe Douglas Adams was reading from an original UK edition.
Right. I would assume so, yes.
Normally the differences are minor and they're very unimportant and they really don't change any of the meaning or content. However, once again, they are going through great difficulties in their travels and they go into Zaire. And in Bukavu, they were out of currency declaration forms. They were told to get them in Goma. They were being shaken down for $50 each in Goma for not having the forms. After an hour of communicating in appalling French, they were let go. In my edition of the book, and not in the audio, it has the addition of they had not paid.
Yeah, because I have a question written on my notes. They didn't say whether they paid the bribe or not. Isn't that funny?
But did they pay?
Yes.
Like, I don't know if I should believe the UK edition, which doesn't say it, or the American edition that does.
Right. I had the same question when I was listening to that particular part of the book. They don't make it clear whether they paid the bribe or not.
And according to the book, the written first American edition, they did not. So while they were in Zaire, they decided to make a side trip to the borders between it, Rwanda, and Uganda to see the mountain gorillas. At this time, there were said to be about 280 gorillas there, 2/3 of which lived in Zaire, 1/3 in Rwanda, and none were known to have a permanent residence in Uganda. On the journey on foot to see the gorillas, they were walking through a field of sago mud salad. And he called it the only known anagram of Douglas Adams.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Do you know any anagrams of your name?
Oh, I don't.
All right, so I looked it up.
I hadn't thought about that. Now I'm going to have to sit here and think about it.
So if you use Bryan with an I, you can be Barnacle Blimp.
I absolutely love that. You can refer to me as Barnacle Blimp from now on.
Okay. Well, I like the one with a Y.
Yeah? Oh, is there another one?
Well, yeah, if you use Brian with a Y.
Yeah.
You're Bellman by crap.
Oh, that's fantastic.
and if you use Jeffrey, which I wanted to use to have more letters than just Jeff,
right.
so I used my full name, Jeffrey. I'm Jiffy Nealers.
That's fantastic, Jiffy.
Thanks.
And did you not happen to notice that in the description of this particular interaction where they're going through Zaire, they discover that anything they need to purchase, they can purchase with the street vendors, including photocopying.
Right.
Does that not remind you of a different scene within the book?
So they had to pull it out of the cave?
Yes! Photocopier
Let it
slides
power
out
up with its
onto
solar
the road.
panels? So when I was listening, I came across another thing that kind of bugged me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the need for a UK original edition being followed up with a first edition for the United States or America or whatever. But I find that they change language too much. I don't know why they need to do that. We all understand it. And when they encountered this large silverback gorilla laying on its side, he had an arm folded over his head and he was scratching his other ear. And in the audio, he was said to be mooching, which means to walk or do things slowly without much purpose.
Right.
Mooching in the United States does have
a different connotation. Yeah, absolutely.
So they had to change it.
Okay.
And in the book copy I have, it said contemplating life.
Oh, that's so funny because
there's a great difference between contemplating life and just kind of lazing around.
Exactly. And that was interesting because there is a great deal going on here when they're talking about the anthropomorphization.
Yes, I hate that word. It's just too hard to say.
Yeah, exactly. Of these animals. And when he has this interaction with the gorilla, it's absolutely fascinating. And he's right on the money when he talks about if we assess our own values onto whatever thought patterns the animal is having, it's truly not real. It's a fiction that we create based on our own inability to become a gorilla.
Okay. Well, working with animals, the tendency to discount all anthropomorphism confuses me. As an example, if you look at a gorilla and it looks sad and you go, oh, the gorilla's sad, you're usually told you're anthropomorphizing. Well, what is probably correct is the gorilla is sad.
Yes.
I mean, Julie, Dr. Julie, who's done a lot of our openings, was in town for the holidays, obviously. And I did ask her a little bit about this, and she said that things have finally changed, and the old white man stuffed shirt professors are finally being taken over by other open-minded professors who actually attribute that animals can have emotions.
Okay.
Now, are they directly ours one-to-one? No, of course they're not. Can you anthropomorphize? Yeah, you can. There's a lot of things that you can imagine. But when it comes down to just basic emotions, you can. And when you work closely with a group of animals, they have expressions.
They do.
They will communicate to you what they're feeling. And it's not just, if I'm going to pin my ears back and look like I'm going to stomp on you, there's more to it. There's a reason that they want to do it. And it isn't just oh, you have my hay,
Right.
and I'm conditioned to stomp on you when you have my hay.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, that's mine. Why do you have that?
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell, and if you watch, you can read what's going on in the animal's mind, and that's the whole basis behind Denise and her horse training.
Correct.
Is figuring out what's going on inside these animals' heads of why they're not behaving, why people or their owners want them to.
Right.
So this blanket anthropomorphizing, or whatever that word is,
Anthropomorphizing.
It bothers me because they just totally discount everything. And I'm glad that they're finally coming around and, changing that.
Right. And I agree. I think that what I'm hearing you say, and I don't generally speak for you directly, but is that the baseline emotions that we feel, the sadness, the fright, the anxiety, the things that we can, temporally measure, probably exist within the animal world. We know that they exist because we can see it based on, the reaction to certain things. When a horse is afraid. When a horse is upset, because you can see by its behavior a pattern that's developed that you're actually able to see. But you're not going to say to yourself, oh, he probably didn't get his soup this morning, so he doesn't feel very good.
No.
So I guess I see it as
horses don't eat soup.
There you go. See, that's why he's upset. He couldn't get his spoon stuck in his hoof, so he couldn't get the soup up to his mouth, and that just made him mad.
Yes.
It's like those damn hamsters when they're driving a car. Oh man. Yeah, so I agree. I know that it is true that we can understand a baser level of their emotional state. And I don't necessarily want to define that as anthropomorphizing. But maybe the scientists of the past believed that was anthropomorphizing.
Yeah. So later on, he was talking about those who want to teach gorillas human language, like with signing, because you always hear about that.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it's presumably to understand and learn about their way of life and the forests and nature. And then he asked, why would we listen to the gorilla since there are cultures on Earth who know nature and the forests, and we don't listen to them?
Yep, the dichotomy.
Yes. So the gorilla population has gone from 786 in 2010 to 1,004 in 2018, and is estimated at 1,063 today. So the mountain gorilla is slowly making a comeback.
Right.
Still endangered, but it's going the right way.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
So they now head off into the savannah of Africa, and they go to Garamba National Park in search of the 22 remaining northern white rhinoceroses. They run out of water, and they did not find a rhino.
Oh my gosh. Well, they lose the Jeep, and then they do find the Jeep eventually, and he finds his thermos of tea. So
Yes, yeah. So the next day they decided to scout by plane to find where in this giant savanna that these rhinos were. And so then the following day they could go try and locate them. So when they did locate them in the plane, Douglas Adams mentioned something that he was discovering as a truism. He said seeing animals such as these in a zoo was absolutely no preparation for seeing them in the wild. White rhinos are not white in color.
Nope.
White is actually vite with a V, which means wide. And wide is referring to its mouth, which is wider than the black rhinoceros, which is probably not black. So rhinos are in danger from poachers because of its horn. And there are two myths surrounding its horn. The first is that it's believed to be an aphrodisiac, which he calls a superstition and has no scientific basis. The second is that anyone actually believes the first.
Oh, yes. This was quite an interesting part of the book. He mentions a lot about the aphrodisiac.
Yeah.
I don't know if I wanted to go into that. Do we want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, we can go there if you want. But
no, I don't think so. One of the things I found interesting about this particular chapter is that at one point, Douglas is talking about their trek through the savannah, and they're talking about getting close to the rhino. And they're playing a game they used to play when they were a kid, where one kid would stand in the front and turn around. Right. So he describes the game of red light, green light that we all used to play when we were kids. And, of course, that reminded me of the time that you and I got to spend watching Squid Games.
Yes.
I thought that was pretty interesting.
So right now, there are two northern white rhinoceros remaining in the world. Naijin and Fatu. Both of them are female, and they live under constant protection from the poachers in Kenya's Ol Pejeta Conservancy. So Sudan, the last remaining male, has died. It says March 19th, 2018. So effectively, the species or subspecies is extinct. Because with no males, you're kind of done. Now, obviously, there might possibly be some genetic manipulation and whatever, but with two female and no males, I'm guessing that it's pretty much it for the white rhino, or the northern white rhino. There are southern white rhino, but not northern.
Were there northern white rhino in the zoo, and those have also died off?
No, there aren't.
Wow.
No zoo northern white rhinos. And the title leopard skin pillbox hat all had to do with a portrait of the leader of Zaire in a painting that was hanging when they entered the country, and that is what was adorning his head. The next chapter is called Heartbeats in the Night, and they are going by helicopter to Fiordland, which is in South Island, New Zealand. They are looking for the kakapo, the night parrot, a large flightless bird. There used to be thousands upon thousands of them. Now, at this time of the book's writing, there are 40. Fiordland was their main territory. Now they are not thought to exist there anymore, but they're going to check. It's like, nobody's seen one for a while, but we have to go check anyway. Animal life on New Zealand used to be totally birds, maybe a bat, but no predators.
Right.
Until the Europeans arrived and brought them. With no predators, many birds became flightless because there was no need to fly and all the food's on the ground. The predators that came over with the Europeans were rats.
Right.
Rats get on the ship, rats get in the cargo, rats get in the luggage. Rats will desiccate an island.
Yes, they will.
So they find an old track and bowl system. That is a shallow depression bowl with tracks leading to it. So I guess acoustics are very important to this bird because the mating call of a male, which is a boom, resembles a heartbeat played through a subwoofer. And so they dig these bowls and they sit in this bowl and they boom, and it just sort of projects this sound to try and attract a female. I guess they did not find any kakapos on that first island.
That's correct. And here again, this is one of the areas which I really enjoyed listening to. And it was really a lot about Douglas Adams's extraordinary descriptions of Fjordland, or the fjords. The other thing that I thought was fascinating is he goes into some detail about vertigo. Actually, this is in a chapter before, but it relates to his trip on the helicopter. And it's those two descriptions about the description of the land that they're going into and the understanding of vertigo from the human perspective. I thought those two descriptors and those two parts of the story were well worth the listen.
Yes, absolutely. The next attempt to find the kakapo was on Codfish Island. They had to jump through a lot of hoops to get permission, but the council believed that the publicity benefits would be worth the risk. There was a kakapo tracker named Arab, and he had a kakapo tracking dog named Boss.
Very well done.
And they were both there under protest. But they found a kakapo.
They did. Now, I always thought this was kind of an interesting thing. They talk about this particular encounter, and this is where basically Adams goes into a little bit of the fantasy world that he likes to be in. And at the beginning of this chapter, while he's on this island, he imagines himself to be lying on these pink and yellow boulders in a foreign land somewhere. And then he wakes up, quote unquote, on these pink and yellow boulders. He's obviously disoriented. He doesn't know where he's been. He's traumatized by all this flying. And his partner says to him that they're going to go and visit these two folks that he had met a couple hours earlier, and that he should remember to pretend to know them since he had already spent a couple hours talking with them. But the one thing they clearly don't make clear, and I wondered about your impression of this particular thing, was why there was a dead penguin hanging off the tree.
They do a very weird description of why that is, as in, they do that every once in a while. I mean, it was just, I have no idea why it was done.
Very bizarre. I mean, that particular piece of it, I'm like, huh? Oh, the other thing I thought was pretty funny was, of course, they had gone out drinking, I guess, the night before, and he wakes up the next morning and he's talking about the beautiful dawn, and he was saying that, dawn would be much more enjoyable if it came around lunchtime.
Yes, it certainly would. But time is an illusion, and lunchtime... Doubly so. Again, he's working in little keywords.
Yep, absolutely.
So the kakapo is still critically endangered. However, the total known population of living individuals today has increased to 247.
Wow, that's wonderful.
The next chapter is called Blind Panic, where they go to China and the Yangtze River to see the dolphin called the Baiji, or Baiji.
Baiji, yep, Baiji. This is funny. This particular chapter was very deep in its environmental descriptions. And most of the chapter, as probably most of his trip, related to his time spent in China. Very little of it actually talked about the dolphin itself.
Right.
And it's funny because why is it that I know you won't be able to answer this question, but I cannot tell you why I remember having read or listened to the story of the temple that he tells when he talks about the temple being rebuilt many, many times, but it's existing.
Yes, the temple is the original temple, even though it has been built and rebuilt and rebuilt over and over and over. Every rebuilding of it is the original.
Exactly. Exactly. So he talks about that, and I know that I have read that before. And I'm like, how is it that I've read this particular chapter or this part of this chapter before? It's so weird.
I'm going to say that story was just in something else you read. Because
it must have been
the way it is.
Yep, must have been, because I definitely know that story of the temple that's been rebuilt and still exists as its original form.
Right, which they would then absolutely know the answer to the intellectual riddle about the borrowed axe. You know that one, right?
No.
I borrow your axe.
Yes.
And as I'm using it, I break the handle.
Mm-hmm.
So I replace the handle.
Mm-hmm.
And as I continue to use it, I chip the head.
Mm-hmm.
So I replace the head. Is it your axe?
Ah, nice puzzle. I love that.
So in this case, they would say, of course it is his axe.
Of course it is, yes. The original intent of it was his, and it still continues to be that.
Right. So having some extra time on their hands in China, they became tourists. Mm-hmm. And one of the places that they went was Tiananmen Square.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was in October of 1988 when, nobody really knew about or cared about Tiananmen Square.
That's correct.
But then in May, June of 1989, everybody knew about Tiananmen Square.
Right.
Because of the protests and subsequent massacre.
Mm-hmm.
They get to the Yangtze River, and the Yangtze River is so polluted and muddy from all the boat and barge traffic, since it is a main way of travel, that the Baji is half blind because its eyes have atrophied from disuse.
Mm-hmm.
The water is so murky that visibility is only a few centimeters, and these dolphins are also being killed by boats and their propellers.
Mm-hmm.
And there is so much traffic on the Yangtze that the underwater noise must make it nearly impossible to navigate using the echolocation, which those dolphins do. They decided at the last minute that they wanted to record the underwater sounds of the Yangtze, and they didn't have any underwater recording equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So they were told that a trick was to put a condom on the microphone to make it waterproof for the underwater recording.
Yes.
Well, man, did they have an interesting time trying to buy a condom.
Yes.
So just imagine trying to explain to somebody that you want to buy a condom and you don't speak the language and you have to do it by gestures.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and at one point they're told it's called a rubber-on or something like that.
Yes.
Oh man. Yeah, again, a lot of this particular episode, or chapter I should say, relates to what they go through in China. And one of the things I wondered about, and I wondered what your reaction to it was apparently on his way to China, he's on a train and the trolley comes around. And each time the trolley comes around, he buys another bottle of aftershave.
Yes.
And I mean, I kind of get what they did. Later, Mark, his friend, says that Douglas is trying to leave a scent trail through China with these little hidden bottles of aftershave.
Right.
But I don't know. Did you get that?
Did I get it?
Well, did it make sense to you? Was it relevant?
It was not relevant. I understand some people's need of impulse buying off of a trolley cart that has all these little gifts. Mm-hmm. And once you've bought one thing of aftershave, you would think that you would need no more. But once you've bought your second bottle, and if they have an assortment of 6 or 8, well, eventually, you've got to buy them all.
There you go. Being a completist, I would understand.
And then he's sitting around going, why do I have these? What I don't understand is why he didn't just throw them all away. Why he needed to hide them under seat cushions or between the mattress or on the train. So the scent trail joke, again, what was real and what was manufactured for the stories is sometimes hard to discern.
He did mention that they spent a lot of time drinking gin and tonics, which I enjoyed.
Yes. So the recording that they took of the underwater river apparently was just a cacophony of white noise.
Mm-hmm.
So they could hear everything for miles around all at once.
Right. It's very fascinating. At least the one thing that I thought was interesting was they mentioned the fetus of the dolphin having eyes in its regular anticipated location, and that as the fetus develops, the eyes slowly migrate up to the top of the dolphin's head. And they mentioned that what light can be seen by the dolphin is only in the upward direction towards the surface of the water. So that's one of the reasons they believe that the dolphin's eyes moved towards the top of its head. So what's interesting to me is that we know that evolution takes a long time. So the turbidity or the cloudiness of the Yangtze River must have existed long before man came to this area, or at least long enough that it affected the evolution of these animals. I don't even know what the scale of the smallest form of evolution would be, but it's certainly longer than we've been around.
You would imagine, but
yes.
I guess it would also depend on what you would consider evolution.
Well, in this particular case, I'm thinking like a change that reaches a steady state, because people have argued that any variation of an individual's DNA from birth can be considered in evolution or evolving. But if that evolution or change does not reach a steady state, for me, I wouldn't consider that evolution. Like, for instance, if people have 6 fingers, which is a common thing, but it's not so common that it becomes steady state.
Right. At this point.
Yes.
And I would rather have a third arm than a 6th finger. Still. I'm going to...
Okay, Zaphod. We'll make sure that happens for you.
So if we're going to evolve a third arm,
yep,
not a 6th finger, because when you're working and you need to hold 2 ends of something and hammer in the middle,
a third arm would be handy.
It certainly would.
Oh my goodness.
So they had one afternoon to try and find and see one of these Baji dolphins.
Mm-hmm.
They were told there were only 200 of them in the 125 miles of this very wide river.
Mm-hmm.
So their chances were not very good. They did not see one, but they did see the only dolphin in captivity named Kiki at the Hydrobiology Institute in Wuhan.
Mm-hmm.
So Kiki was found injured by a fisherman in 1980, and Kiki died in 2002.
Yes, and according to all the records that I could find, and it's really rather inconclusive, and I don't know whether it's because it's China or, because you would think the internet has every bit of information out there available, but at least from the research that I did, it appears that they are now effectively extinct.
I did read that also, because nobody has seen one in many years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But they were building a semi-nature reserve when Douglas was there, and they went and visited it, and they continued to build it, and they have kept it up, and it still lists the Baji as one of the things that they're trying to help, even though there aren't any around. But there's another... What was that other dolphin that they...
Oh, the finless. The
finless, yes.
Yeah, the finless dolphin.
They did see one of the finless dolphins, and he asked, I guess, Mark or whoever it was that saw it and pointed it out, how did he know it was a finless dolphin? And the answer basically was, well, it didn't have a fin.
And the other answer, cheeky answer was, well, because I saw it.
Yes.
And the act of seeing it actually created it, right?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
So then there is the next chapter, rare or medium rare. And the next animal they go to see is the Rodriguez fruit bat. And Rodriguez is an island in the Indian Ocean belonging to Mauritius.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, it was the rarest fruit bat in the world.
Okay.
Their contact on the mainland of Mauritius told them that there were 100 of them, and they're not rare.
Yeah, this...
Because he said, if you want to see some rare animals...
I got you rare animals here, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is interesting. And here again, my observation of this particular chapter is... Throughout the book, I mentioned that the cadence that Douglas Adams used reflects the character that he's trying to build. And while he's having a conversation with these ornithologists, these specialists,
right,
the speed and quick-wittedness, again, that we're talking about, of these dialogues was just, it's unpaced. I mean, it's so fast. It's almost tedious in its presentation, but it's extremely fascinating. But here again, I think it's a fiction that Douglas creates, and I'll talk more about that after the next chapter.
So after they were told that there's 100 fruit bats, why are you here to see them? They were talked into seeing animals like the pink pigeons, the Mauritius kestrels, and the echo parakeet. And what that made me think at the time was, how did they make a list of what to see? Like they had to do some kind of research to find endangered animals. Mm-hmm. And obviously, if you Wikipedia it or look or do any kind of a search about rare or nearly extinct animals, mm-hmm. the list is enormous.
Right. Yeah, it is curious.
They had to pare it down, and I guess rhinos and dragons and gorillas and such are better entertainment value, I guess, than pink pigeons and kestrels and parakeets.
Yeah, it's funny because even Adams mentions in this chapter that he's just not at all thrilled when it comes to birds, right. But he's fascinated by the nature that surrounds him. But in this particular case, you take it or leave it.
Yeah.
When it comes to birds,
When it comes to birds, yeah. So there is a term that gets used over and over, and it's in this last chapter that he finally decides that he says, maybe we should be a little more descriptive and let you know what these definitions are. And it's the term endemic and exotic. Mm-hmm. And endemic just means that the species is native to a specific place and exists nowhere else.
Right.
Like on Madagascar. Mm-hmm. They exist there and nowhere else. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exotic, you think, what exotic species could possibly be here? Well, it's a rat. Because the rat doesn't belong there. Mm-hmm. They're imported in, and they're highly invasive, and they totally take over the delicate balance that's obtained on an island. So when you think of an exotic species, that just means it doesn't belong there.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything fancy or better or... in fact, it's bad.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And what makes you think that perhaps when they were making their list, they had some kind of a geographic understanding of the rarity of the animal? Because again, those fruit bats only exist within this one environment, and the Komodo dragons existed within that one environment. So maybe they took the location into account when they determined which animals they were going to see and the potential for that animal to become extinct because of the reduction of the environment in which that animal lived.
Right. Yeah.
But I bet you could probably say that, like you said, for thousands of animals, not just these few.
Yeah. And even though he was very unimpressed with the birds, I'm going to say that he was happy that he decided to detour and take a look at some of these super rare birds.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
One of the islands that they visited was called Round Island. And it's not really a round island, but it's called Round Island. And this is a very rare island because its habitat is mostly unspoiled. And the reason is the difficulty there is for actually reaching the island. There aren't any beaches or harbors or ports, and it's craggy rocks, and waves are just pounding up against it all the time. And it seems like Douglas Adams had a brush with death, slipping off the rocks.
Right, and falling into the ocean.
Yeah, trying to jump from the dinghy to the island.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's funny because I was just thinking about that. One of the things my parents like to do is travel quite a bit. And they told me that one of the things that they recommended that you do is if you intend to go to the Galapagos Islands, you should definitely go when you are young. Because it's extremely difficult to get in and out of the boats and up and down and out, onto those particular locations. So I could relate to Adams's trauma here as he fell into the ocean and think about the travel dangers that would ensue.
Right. It also said, for how difficult it is for man to get to this island, it is impossible for a rat. So there is no way that a rat coming in on a boat is going to be able to make it from the boat to that island. So that is the reason it has stayed pristine.
Right.
All right, so the Rodriguez fruit bat had populations that were dwindling in the 70s, and then there was a cyclone in 1979 which, reduced the population to about 70.
Okay.
So here in the late 80s, there were about 100, he said.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like as of 2016, the population has rebounded to over 20,000 bats.
Wow.
So they're coming back. The first bird that I mentioned that he was also talked into seeing, the pink pigeon, which was extremely scarce back then.
Right.
There's about 400 birds
Nice.
left in the wild
Nice.
right now.
Mm-hmm.
So the second bird I mentioned was the Mauritius kestrel.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1970s, it was the most endangered bird of prey in the world, with only 4 known birds remaining.
Right.
As of now, there's around 800. So they've done very well in rebounding that.
Wonderful.
And the last bird I mentioned was the echo parakeet.
Mm-hmm.
In the late 1980s, there were less than 20 of them.
Yes.
And as of now, they have rebounded to approximately 700.
Wonderful.
So that group on the island of Mauritius has done tremendous things to save these rarest of all birds.
Yes. Fascinating.
So at the end of all of this, he tells a little parable about this woman who is selling books that contain all the knowledge in the world. And she'll sell them for a price, we'll just say 100 gold pieces. And they decline. So she takes half of the books and burns them in front of them and leaves. And she comes back some other time and says, I now have half of all the knowledge in the universe. And it's 200 gold pieces. So the knowledge went in half, but the price doubled. And they thought she was ridiculous and sent her away. And it isn't just that the books are gone. The knowledge is gone. So they can't just go get this knowledge somewhere else. Like the world is losing this knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And so she burns half of it again and goes away. Comes back later, and now there's only a quarter of it, which she's selling for 400 gold pieces. Again, she doubled the price, and there's only 1/4 of all the knowledge. And they pass again. And then she goes to, burns half again. But it gets down to where there's very little knowledge left, and the price is exorbitant, but they now want to pay it because they can't lose this last little bit of knowledge. And it goes so well with here when birds or animals or whatever on their way to extinction. It doesn't matter because they're still there and flying and there's more birds here. And then when they're almost gone, then exorbitant amount of resources are needed to save them and bring them back.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, I mean, salespeople out there, everybody knows that it costs far less to keep a customer than it does to attract a new one. So, same type of thing.
Yes, I thought it was very interesting. The final part of the book is an epilogue by Douglas Adams's traveling companion, Mark. And he does a summary of the condition of the animals that they've gone to see. And we've already done that summary, so it isn't necessary for us to do that. But there again, I wanted to mention, as I did prior to this, about the cadence of an individual's language. And the epilogue is actually spoken by Mark himself.
Right.
So what I found fascinating is in Douglas Adams's retelling of the dialogues that he had with Mark and the conversations back and forth with other characters, you do get a very strong sense of the character of the other individual. And I wasn't really surprised, but I did notice that in Mark's relating of the condition of the animals that they went to see, their current condition, he did not appear or sound, I should say, like the man that Douglas describes.
Right. Yes.
Which, shouldn't really be a surprise, because one of the things that we all love about Douglas Adams's writing is that his characters are just complete and whole individuals in and of themselves. They have an entire story with almost every line they say. And that's one of the things that I know that we appreciate most about his writing style. Again, I would recommend the reading and more the listening to this particular story because it is done so well.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And Mark's final observation is one that basically echoes what you had said just a few minutes ago. So Mark makes the observation that knowing the fate of all of these animals should make you sadder and wiser. But in fact, he feels that they may now be sadder and better informed.
Right.
Which is clearly not the same as wiser.
Correct. So having you mention that actually listening to Mark after hearing Douglas Adams' interpretation of Mark or portrayal of Mark being vastly different, it reminded me of the audiobook that I listened to, which was of Tuesday at Maury's.
Right.
In that book, at the end of the audiobook, there is a little clip of his actual recordings. And I'm listening to the book and I'm listening to, and here's what it said on the tape. And then they would read the transcript of the tape. And there was this one part that completely stood out to me. And I was like, wow, that was wonderful. That was the clip that they played at the end of the book.
Interesting.
And even though every word was the same, all of the inflections and tone did not portray what they did in the text.
Right.
And I'm like, wait, that's totally different than what you told me it was earlier. And now I don't know if reading something, because you're reading a transcript, so you're putting your own, so they obviously didn't listen to it, they're just reading it, and they've imposed their own inflection.
Right.
So now the reading of a transcript statement, That's why I hate letters and I hate email when you have to discuss a serious topic.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reader is the one who puts the tone.
Right.
And you can read anything like it is a sarcastic insult. No matter how sincere it is.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, 100%. I agree. And that's the kind of interpretation that is required, I guess, of an effective writer. Not everybody can do that. I mean, it's clear that our communications fall apart when we try to communicate on paper. Most of us are incapable of writing in a way that we speak. And even if we do, we're going to edit ourselves to death. I've done it myself 100 times. I've written something and said, no, that doesn't sound right. But it's grammatically correct. I'm like, just doesn't sound like something I'd say,
Right.
So, it's funny because I go back to some of the things that I've written and I'm like, I wrote that? It doesn't sound like me, but boy, am I glad that you and I chose to listen and or read this particular book, because it really brought us back to the world of Douglas Adams. And I think that's what we want to do, and that's where we want to be. And I really appreciate the fact that we have listened to this book and found great joy in it.
Well, good. So did I. So I think that the best thing we can do is take the exact same subject and listen to it not by Douglas Adams.
So I love it.
For next time, I had mentioned earlier that I have never been able to find the original BBC radio show that was of this series. But in 2009, Mark Carwadine, the original zoologist, has partnered up with Stephen Fry, one of Douglas Adams' longtime friends.
Right.
And they did a very similar trip that actually is visiting some of the same places and a few new ones.
Excellent.
This is on Tubi, tubi.com, which is a free TV movie in the United States. I have told a friend of mine about it who lives in Poland, and he said, sorry, not available in your area. So if you live outside the United States, I don't know where you can find it, but I do know that it's on a free service here in the United States. And if there is something similar in your country of origin, I would check there. But it's Last Chance to See. It's a 2009 BBC TV series, 6 episodes. That's what we're going to talk about the first Thursday in February.
Fantastic. I look forward to it.
Well, Brian, now that we know everything that is happening for the next time, I guess I have to say that this is the end.
The final part of the book is an epilogue by Douglas's traveling compartment.
The boot of the car.
Oh, put that on the blooper reel.
Thank you for listening to this. A new episode is released on the first Thursday of every month. A special thank you goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettyneatidea.buzzsprout.com. While there, you can find links to all of my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can contact us via email at digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook at Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. You can message us on Twitter, or should I say X, at Watches Idea. And our Instagram is Watches Idea Podcast.
This has been a Froods for Thought production.